The question is, what is the Jewish position about democracy versus monarchy? So here I think, the best answer might be a quote from, I believe, Winston Churchill, who once said, "Democracy is the worst system ever invented except for everything else." By that, we mean the following, that obviously democracy is not the optimal political system the Torah desires. The Torah does talk about a monarchy, and according to the Maimonides, establishing a king is considered to be a mitzvah in the Torah. And yet, we also recognize that when you have a situation where kings are going to be dictators, they're going to abuse their powers, they're not going to further the spiritual aims of the Torah, under those circumstances, it's actually better not to have a monarchy. And as a result, democracy becomes what you might call the second best system, but a system that may become the first best until you have a monarch that is following the dictates of God. So thus, the ultimate goal of Judaism is the Messianic age, when you have a Melech HaMashiach who is going to keep the commandments, going to bring the Jews to the Torah, and that is really the highest goal, because that, in a sense, symbolizes the Almighty. It's kind of almost an intermediary figure in which, by seeing in the personality of a flesh and blood the attribute of kingship, we can kind of extrapolate God's unitary kingship over the world. But I will say that in the here and now, where we are not yet in the time of the Mashiach, I think a system of government that allows many voices to be heard is preferable to that of a dictatorship from the top.
Is there a way of having both at the same time? Are they necessarily a contradiction?
Well, not necessarily. In other words, a good monarch is someone who listens to his subjects, and indeed, a true monarch is a slave to his subjects. In fact, it's very common among many spiritual leaders over the centuries that when they would sign their names, they would put in, Eved li'avdei Hashem. I am a slave, I am a servant to those who serve God. So what you're bringing up is a very important concept, that true leadership is a leadership in which I am essentially serving the people rather than the people serving me. But the trick is, serving the people doesn't necessarily mean listening to everything they want. Sometimes a leader has to be willing and to have the courage to override what people are clamoring for, if it is not in their best interest and if it will not bring them closer to God. So every decision a leader makes has to be what is best for my people. But that's not necessarily the same thing as listening to what the people want. Again, the analogy would be to children. A child may want candy all the time, but a good parent will not give him candy all the time. It'll give him a lack of nutrition, can ruin his teeth, and the like. So in some ways, a leader has to be willing to override the popular will. But when the leader himself is imperfect, and the leader himself is egotistical, the leader himself is selfish, and has his own personal objectives, that is just not going to work, because he will no longer be taking what the welfare of the people as his touchstone. So that is why I think in a very imperfect, flawed era of human leadership, we do need to have a great deal of popular democracy. But I think in an ultimate sense, if we could have leaders who would be above the fray, I think the Torah would want us to be guided by those leaders rather than simply the emotions and the feelings of the moment.